The massive alien warship moved through space like a predator hunting its prey. Captain Vexler stood on the bridge, his 6 arms folded behind his back as he watched the empty darkness ahead. His purple skin gleamed under the bridge lights, and his 4 yellow eyes scanned the display screens with practiced ease. "Captain, we have found something," called out Lieutenant Yadin from her station. Her voice carried excitement as she pointed at the main screen. "There is debris ahead. It looks very old." Vexler walked over to examine the readings. The debris field stretched for several miles, filled with twisted metal and broken pieces of what had once been a spacecraft. But it was not the wreckage that caught his attention. It was the small object floating in the center of it all. "What is that pod?" he asked, his deep voice echoing through the bridge. "Unknown, sir," replied Dr. Kalanis, the ship's science officer. His long, thin fingers worked quickly over his controls. "The technology appears primitive, very primitive. I would estimate it is at least 400 years old," Vexler smiled, showing his sharp teeth. He loved collecting ancient artifacts from dead civilizations. His personal collection was famous throughout the Zephyrian Empire. This discovery might be another valuable addition. "Bring it aboard," he ordered. "I want to examine it myself." The tractor beam reached out from the warship and gently pulled the small pod into the cargo bay. Vexler made his way down to the lower decks, followed by Dr. Kalanis and several crew members. The cargo bay was huge, designed to hold captured enemy ships. But the small pod looked tiny in the vast space. The pod was white and cylindrical, about 7 feet long and 3 feet wide. Strange markings covered its surface, symbols that none of them recognized. Frost still clung to parts of the metal, and blue lights blinked slowly along its sides. "The power source is still active," Dr. Kalanis said as he ran his scanner over the pod. "Whatever is inside has been kept frozen for centuries. Can you open it?" Vexler asked. "Yes, but carefully. The life support systems are very delicate. If we damage them, whatever is inside will die instantly."
Yes.
Vexler nodded. "Proceed, but slowly." Dr. Kalanis connected his equipment to the pod's power systems. The alien technology was so advanced that interfacing with the primitive human systems was like using a supercomputer to operate a simple calculator. Within minutes, he had figured out how to safely open the pod. Steam hissed from the seals as the top section began to rise. Cold air rushed out, carrying with it the smell of chemicals and old metal. As the lid fully opened, they could see inside. A human lay motionless in the pod, surrounded by tubes and wires. He appeared to be a young male, maybe in his late 20s. His skin was pale from the long sleep, and his brown hair was cut very short. He wore a green military uniform covered with patches and symbols. "Fascinating," Dr. Kalanis whispered. "A perfectly preserved human specimen." Vexler leaned closer to examine the sleeping figure. Humans were supposed to be extinct, wiped out centuries ago in some primitive war on their home world. The Zephyrian Empire had records of them, but they were considered to be a simple species that barely managed to reach the stars before destroying themselves. "Look at these markings on his uniform," Vexney said, pointing at the patches. "These symbols might tell us which human faction he belonged to." "Can you wake him up?" Vexler asked. "I believe so." "God." "His life signs are stable, and the pod seems designed to revive its occupants safely. It will take several hours, though. Body needs time to adjust to normal temperature and chemistry." Vexler was pleased. A living human would be much more valuable than a dead one. He could study how they thought, how they moved, what made them so aggressive that they destroyed their own species. "Do it," he commanded, "but move him to the medical bay first. I want full security around him when he wakes up." The crew carefully transferred the pod to the ship's medical section. Dr. Kalanis worked for hours, slowly bringing the human's body temperature back to normal and adjusting the chemical balance in his blood. The process was delicate, but the pod's own systems helped guide the revival. As the human's body warmed, his face began to show more color. His breathing became deeper and more regular. Finally, after 6 hours of careful work, his eyes began to flutter open. The human's eyes were brown, and they moved around the room quickly, taking in everything. He tried to sit up, but the medical restraints held him down. He said something in an unknown language, his voice rough from the long sleep. "Easy," Dr. Kalanus said in the common galactic language. "You are safe." The human looked at him with confusion. He tried to speak again, but the words made no sense to any of them. Dr. Kalanus quickly attached a translation device to the human's head. "Can you understand me now?" the doctor asked. The human nodded slowly. Where am I?" he asked. His voice was weak but clear. "You are aboard a Zephyrian warship," Dr. Kalanus explained. "We found you floating in space inside that pod. You have been asleep for a very long time." The human's eyes widened. "How long?" "Nearly 400 years, by our calculations." The human was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, he spoke again. "My name is Jake Morrison. I am a staff sergeant in the United States Army Rangers." Captain Vexther stepped forward. "I am Captain Vexther of the Zephyrian Empire. You are now under our protection, human." Jake looked at the tall alien captain with his purple skin and multiple arms. If he was surprised or frightened, he did not show it. Instead, he seemed to be studying Vexther carefully, as if memorizing. "Every detail? What happened to my ship?" Jake asked. "My squad?" "We found only debris," Vexther replied. "You were the only survivor." Jake closed his eyes for a moment, and the aliens could see pain cross his face. When he opened them again, he looked directly at Vexther. "What do you want with me?" Vexther smiled. "You are a fascinating specimen, human. Your species is extinct, yet here you are. We wish to learn from you, to understand what humans were like before they destroyed themselves." Jake said nothing, but continued to watch the captain with those steady brown eyes. There was something about the way he looked at them that made some of the crew uncomfortable. It was not the look of a primitive being amazed by superior technology. It was the look of a predator studying its environment. But Vexther did not notice this. He was too pleased with his discovery. "You will be given comfortable quarters," he told Jake. "Food, clothing, entertainment. In return, you will answer our questions about human culture and history." Jake nodded slowly. "I understand." Over the next few days, Jake was given a tour of the ship. The aliens showed him their advanced technology with obvious pride, explaining how their weapons could destroy entire planets and how their shields could deflect any attack. They told him about the great Zephyrian Empire and how they had brought peace and order to this part of the galaxy. Jake listened to everything with apparent wonder, asking simple questions and seeming amazed by their achievements. To the aliens, he appeared to be exactly what they expected, a primitive human soldier overwhelmed by superior technology. But Jake was learning much more than they realized. His trained eyes cataloged every weakness, every flaw in their systems. His military mind was already working on plans and strategies. And deep inside, a part of him was beginning to smile. The aliens thought they had found a harmless relic from a dead species. They had no idea what they had really awakened. Jake had been awake for 3 days now, and the aliens were enjoying showing off their technology. Captain Vexther personally led him through the weapons deck, pointing out each system with obvious pride. "This is our main plasma cannon," Vexther explained, gesturing to a massive weapon that took up half the room. "It can destroy a small moon with one shot. It's much more advanced than the crude projectile weapons your people used." Jake nodded and looked impressed. "Amazing," he said in a voice full of wonder. "How does it work?" "Plasma containment fields focus. Pure energy into a beam," Dr. Kalanus explained, happy to share his knowledge. "The power comes from our fusion reactors. Very sophisticated technology." Inside his mind, Jake was analyzing everything. The plasma cannon was powerful but slow to charge. The containment fields were stable but predictable. The targeting system relied entirely on computer calculations with no human intuition backup. These aliens had built weapons that were strong, but not smart. And this, Vexther continued, leading Jake to another section, is our shield generator. No weapon in the galaxy can penetrate our defenses. Jake examined the shield controls with apparent fascination. The system was impressive, but had a critical flaw. It protected against energy weapons, but was vulnerable to certain frequency disruptions. The aliens had never encountered an enemy clever enough to exploit this weakness. "Your people must have been very primitive," Lieutenant Yadin commented. As they walked, chemical rockets and metal bullets. "How did you ever expect to survive in space with such basic tools?" Jake smiled humbly. "We did our best with what we had," he said. "We were not as advanced as you." But Jake knew the truth. In 2089, human technology had reached levels these aliens could not imagine. His own battle armor, stored in his pod, contained systems that could interface with any technology, adapt to any environment, and enhance human capabilities beyond normal limits. The weapons he had trained with could manipulate matter at the molecular level, create localized gravity fields, and even bend space-time on a small scale. The aliens continued their tour, showing Jake their communication systems, their navigation computers, and their tactical displays. Everything was automated, controlled by artificial intelligence that followed rigid programming. There was no room for creativity or adaptation.
Adaptation.
"Computers make all the decisions?" Jake asked, pretending to be confused. "Of course," Commander Nexler replied. "Computer systems are much more reliable than biological decision-making. They do not make mistakes based on emotion or fear." Nodded as if this made sense to him. But he had been trained in human military doctrine, where computers were tools to enhance human judgment, not replace it. Human warriors learned to trust their instincts, to adapt to unexpected situations, to think creatively under pressure. These aliens had given up the very qualities that made them dangerous. On the fourth day, Jake was in his quarters when alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Red lights flashed, and the sound of running feet echoed in the corridors. Jake opened his door and saw crew members rushing past, their faces showing panic. "What is happening?" he asked a passing technician. "Corthok raiders?" the alien gasped. "They came out of nowhere. The captain needs all hands at battle stations." Jake had heard about the Corthok from conversations with the crew. They were a savage species known for their brutal attacks and unpredictable tactics. Unlike the orderly Zephyrians, the Corthok fought with chaos and violence, making them difficult for computer systems to predict. Jake made his way to the bridge, where he found Captain Vexler shouting orders at his crew. The main screen showed several smaller ships attacking the Zephyrian warship, darting in and out like angry insects. "Shields at 60%, Lieutenant Yadin reported. "They are using some kind of disruptor weapon," Turnfire Vexler commanded. "Target their engines." The plasma cannons fired, but the Corthok ships were too fast and unpredictable. They moved in patterns that the Zephyrian computers could not anticipate, striking at weak points before darting away to safety. Jake watched the battle with growing interest. The Zephyrians were losing because they were fighting the way their computers told them to fight. Their weapons were powerful but slow. Their tactics were logical but predictable. The Corthok were winning through speed, surprise, and chaos. "They are jamming our communications," Dr. Kalanis announced. "I cannot coordinate with the other ships in our fleet." Boarding pods launched. Another crew member shouted, "They are trying to board us." Captain Vexler's face showed worry for the first time since Jake had known him. "Seal all bulkheads. Security teams to defensive positions." The ship shuddered as the Corthok boarding pods attached to the hull. Jake could hear the sound of cutting tools as the raiders began to burn through the outer armor. Were brave, but they were not prepared for the savage hand-to-hand combat that the Corthok preferred. "Human," Vexler said, turning to Jake. "You must go to the detention area. It is the safest place on the ship." Jake nodded obediently. "Yes, Captain, I understand." But as he left the bridge, Jake was already making different plans. I had studied the ship's layout during his tours. He knew where the weak points were, where the Corthok would try to enter, and how the Zephyrian defenses would respond. The detention area was in the lower decks, surrounded by thick walls and heavy security doors. 2 guards escorted Jake down. The corridors, their weapons ready, but their movements nervous. They were clearly afraid of the Corthok raiders. "Will we be safe here?" Jake asked, playing the role of a frightened primitive. "Yes," one guard replied. "The Corthok are savage but not smart. They cannot break through our security systems." Jake nodded, but he was listening to the sounds of battle echoing through the ship. The Corach had already boarded in 3 locations. The Zephyrian security teams were falling back, unable to match the raiders' ferocity. As they reached the detention area, Jake heard an explosion from somewhere above. The lights flickered, and dust fell from the ceiling. The guards looked at each other with growing fear. "Maybe we should contact the bridge," one suggested. "The communications are still jammed," the other replied. "We follow orders. The human stays here until the captain says otherwise." Jake sat quietly in the detention cell, apparently calm and resigned, but his mind was working furiously. The Corach were winning because they understood something the Zephyrians did not. War was not about having the best technology or the most logical tactics. War was about adapting, surviving, and using every advantage available. The sounds of fighting grew closer. Jake could hear the distinctive roar of Corach weapons and the screams of Zephyrian crew members. The raiders were cutting through the ship's defenses like they were made of paper. One of the guards received a message on his communicator. His face went pale as he listened. "They had broken through to Deck 7, he told his partner. "Security teams are requesting backup. Should we go help them? Our orders are to guard the human." Jake almost smiled. The aliens were so rigid in their thinking that they would follow orders even when those orders made no sense. Human soldiers were trained to think for themselves, to adapt their missions based on changing circumstances. Another explosion rocked the ship much closer. This time, the lights went out completely, leaving them in emergency lighting that cast red shadows on the walls. In the distance, Jake could hear the sound of running feet and shouting voices. The Corach were coming, and the Zephyrians were not ready for them, but Jake was ready. He had been waiting for this moment, studying his captors and learning their weaknesses. Now it was time to show them what a human soldier could really do. He stood up in his cell and smiled. The guards looked at him with confusion, not understanding why their prisoner seemed so calm when death was approaching. They had no idea that they had just given a human warrior the perfect opportunity to demonstrate why his species had survived when so many others had fallen. The sound of cutting metal grew louder as the Corach raiders worked their way through the ships, hull just 2 decks above the detention area. Jake could hear their savage roars and the terrified screams of Zephyrian crew members. The 2 guards outside his cell were getting more nervous by the minute. "We should call for backup," one guard said, his forehand shaking as he held his weapon. "The communications are still down," the other replied. "We wait for orders." Jake stood up and walked to the front of his cell. "The detention system," he said quietly. "How does it work?" The guards looked at him with surprise. "What? Your detention system? How does it lock and unlock the cells?" One guard laughed nervously. "Why would you want to know that, human?" "The locks are controlled by the main computer. Only authorized personnel can open them."
Oh.
Jake nodded thoughtfully. "And if the main computer is damaged, then the cells lock permanently. It is a safety feature to prevent prisoners from escaping during emergencies." "I see," Jake said. He walked to the back of his cell and examined the wall carefully. The guards watched him with confusion, not understanding what he was doing. A massive explosion shook the entire ship. The lights went out completely, leaving them in total darkness for several seconds before the emergency power kicked in. Red warning lights bathed everything in an eerie glow. "They are on this deck," one guard whispered. The sound of plasma fire echoed through the corridors, followed by the horrible screaming roars that meant the Corach were winning. The guards pressed themselves against the walls, their weapons pointed at the corridor entrance. Jake had been studying the cell's construction during his 3 days of observation. The Zephyrians built everything with their advanced technology, but they relied too heavily on their computer systems. The cell walls were strong, but the locking mechanism was electronic, connected to the ship's main power grid. He pulled a small metal plate from his uniform, a piece of his military insignia, that looked decorative but was actually a sophisticated tool. Human soldiers in 2089 carried equipment that could serve multiple purposes, hidden in plain sight. Jake inserted the metal plate into a tiny gap where the cell door met its frame. The plate was made of a smart metal that could change its molecular structure when exposed to electrical current. He pressed a hidden button on his belt, and the plate began to reshape itself, becoming a thin electronic probe. The probe found the door's control circuit, and Jake began to work. His military training included electronic warfare, computer hacking, and systems manipulation. What took Zephyrian technicians hours to accomplish, Jake could do in minutes using techniques the aliens had never imagined. The cell door clicked softly as its lock disengaged. Jake waited. The guards were too focused on the approaching danger to notice the quiet sound. He could hear the Corthok getting closer, their heavy footsteps echoing in the metal corridors. A Corthok warrior appeared at the far end of the corridor. It was huge, covered in thick armor and carrying weapons that looked like they were designed for tearing things apart rather than precise shooting. Its face was hidden behind a metal mask, but its red eyes glowed with savage hunger. The guards opened fire immediately. Their plasma beams lit up the corridor, but the Corthok moved with surprising speed for something so large. It dodged the first shots and charged forward, roaring like a wild animal. More Corthok appeared behind the first one. They spread out, using the corridor walls and ceiling for cover. Their weapons fired back, sending bolts of energy that made the metal walls glow red-hot where they hit. Jake watched the battle with professional interest. The Zephyrian guards were good shots, but they fought like they had been trained by computers. They took cover in predictable positions, fired in regular patterns, tried to use logical tactics against an enemy that had no logic. The Corthok fought like berserkers. They used speed, aggression, and unpredictability to overcome superior firepower. One of them actually ran along the ceiling, using magnetic claws to stay attached while firing down at the guards. One guard fell, his weapon spinning away across the floor. The other guard kept firing, but Jake could see panic in his movements. The Corthok were winning through pure savagery. Jake pushed his cell door open quietly and stepped into the corridor. The surviving guard saw him and shouted, "Get back in your cell, human. It is not safe." But Jake was already moving. He rolled across the floor, grabbed the fallen guard's weapon, and came up firing in one smooth motion. His first shot took down the Corthok on the ceiling. His second shot hit another raider in the chest, sending it crashing into the wall. The remaining guards stared in amazement. Jake's movements were nothing like the clumsy, primitive human they had been expecting. He moved like a professional soldier, like someone who had been born for... Warjack did not fight like the Zephyrians. He did not take cover in the obvious places or fire in predictable patterns. Instead, he used the corridor itself as a weapon. He shot at the ceiling panels, bringing down chunks of metal that crushed one Corthok. He aimed at the wall conduits, causing electrical explosions that blinded two more raiders. When a Corthok charged at him with a massive blade, Jake did something that made the Zephyrian guard gasp. Instead of retreating or trying to shoot, Jake dropped his weapon and met the charge head-on. He used the raider's own momentum against it, grabbing its arm and using a throwing technique that sent the creature flying into the far wall with bone-crushing force. "Impossible," the guard whispered. Jake picked up his weapon and continued fighting, but now he was not just defending. He was hunting. He moved through the ship's corridors like he had built them himself, using maintenance shafts and service. Tunnels that the Corthok did not even know existed. Jake appeared behind a group of raiders and eliminated them before they knew he was there. He used their own weapons against their companions, turning their savage tactics back on themselves. When his plasma weapon ran out of power, he picked up a piece of broken metal and used it like a spear, throwing it with deadly accuracy. The ship's internal sensors tracked his movement, and the information reached the bridge where Captain Vexler was still trying to coordinate the defense. Sir Lieutenant Yadan called out, "Something strange is happening on Deck 12. The human prisoner has escaped, but he is not running away. He is fighting the Corthok." "Fighting them?" Repeated. "That is impossible. He is just a primitive soldier. The sensors show he has eliminated 17 raiders in the last 10 minutes, Yaden reported. He is moving through areas of the ship that our own security teams could not reach." Dr. Kalanis looked up from his station with disbelief. 17. Our best warriors cannot achieve such results against the Corach. On the screen, they watched Jake's progress through the ship. He was not just fighting randomly. He was systematically hunting down every Corach raider, cutting off their retreat routes and eliminating their leaders first. His tactics were so advanced that even the ship's computer systems could not predict his next move. Jake found the main group of Corach raiders in the engine room. They had been trying to sabotage the ship's power systems, but now they turned to face this unexpected threat. There were 12 of them, all heavily armed and experienced fighters. Jake stood in the doorway and smiled. This was what he had been trained for. Not the simple warfare that these aliens understood, but real combat where intelligence mattered more than firepower. He did not charge in like the Corach expected. Instead, he began to manipulate the engine room systems. He rerouted power conduits, causing electrical discharges that separated the raiders from each other. He used the artificial gravity controls to make some of them float helplessly in the air. He turned their own aggressive nature against them by making them attack shadows and echoes. Within 20 minutes, the engine room was silent. All 12 Corach raiders were down, and Jake stood among them without a scratch on his uniform. On the bridge, the crew stared at their sensors in complete shock. The human they had thought was a primitive relic had just single-handedly saved their ship. The bridge was completely silent as Captain Vexter stared at the sensor readings. Every Corach raider on the ship was either dead or unconscious. The attack that should have destroyed his vessel had been stopped by one human soldier. "This cannot be accurate," Commander Nexula said, her voice shaking. "The sensors must be malfunctioning." "I ran 3 separate scans," Lieutenant Yadun replied. "The readings are correct. The human eliminated 31 Corach raiders in 47 minutes. Dr. Kalanis looked up from his station, his face pale. "Captain, I need to speak with you privately. There is something about the human that we must discuss." Before Vexter could respond, the bridge doors opened and Jake walked in. His uniform was dirty and torn in a few places, but he showed no signs of injury or exhaustion. He moved with the same calm confidence he had displayed since waking up. But now, the aliens saw it differently. "Captain," Jake said politely, "I believe the immediate threat has been neutralized. However, you should know that the Corach will likely send more ships when this one fails to report back." Vexter stared at the human who had just saved his ship. "How did you escape from the detention cell?" Jake smiled slightly. "Your locking system has a design flaw. It relies too heavily on central computer control, and you understand the underlying principles. Bypassing it becomes relatively simple." "Relatively simple," Dr. Kalanis repeated. "That system was designed to be escape-proof. Our best engineers spent years perfecting it. I am sure they did their best with the knowledge they had," Jake replied. There was no insult in his tone, but somehow his words made the aliens feel very small. Captain Vextar felt anger rising in his chest. This primitive human was speaking to him like he was a child. "You will explain how you defeated the Corach. Our security forces could not stop them, yet you eliminated them all by yourself." Jake nodded. "Of course, Captain. The Corach are effective fighters, but they rely on chaos and aggression rather than strategy. Once you understand their patterns, they become predictable." "Predictable." Commander Nexula laughed harshly. "The Corach have been terrorizing this sector for decades. No one has ever called them predictable. With respect, Commander, I think your people approach warfare differently than humans do," Jake said. "You build powerful weapons and strong defenses, then use computer systems to coordinate everything. It is an effective method against enemies who fight the same way." "Humans fight differently?" Vexter asked. Jake was quiet for a moment. As if deciding how much to reveal, finally he spoke. "Human military doctrine is based on adaptability. We train our soldiers to use any environment, any weapon, any situation to their advantage. We do not rely on superior technology alone." "But your technology was primitive," Dr. Kalanis protested. "Chemical rockets, projectile weapons, basic computers. How could such simple tools create effective warriors?" Jake smiled again, and this time there was something almost sad in his expression. "Doctor, I think there's been a misunderstanding about human history." The bridge crew exchanged glances. Something in Jake's tone made them all feel uncomfortable. "What kind of misunderstanding?" Vexter demanded. "Your records about humanity are incomplete," Jake said carefully. "Believe we destroyed ourselves in primitive wars, using crude weapons, but that is not what happened." "Then what did happen?" Dr. Kalanis asked. Jake walked over to one of the bridge stations and placed his hand on the control panel. Immediately, the station's displays began showing information that should have been impossible for anyone without proper authorization to access. "How are you doing that?" Lieutenant Yadin gasped. "Neural interface technology," Jake explained. "Casually, every human soldier in my time was equipped with implants that allowed direct communication with electronic systems. It makes us very effective with any technology, regardless of its origin." He continued working with the ship's computers, and data began appearing on the main screen. The aliens watched in growing shock as Jake accessed files that were supposed to be heavily encrypted. By 2089, Nanity had developed technology that operated on principles you have not yet discovered, Jake said. "We could manipulate matter at the molecular level, create localized gravity fields, and interface directly with quantum systems." "Possible," Commander Nexula whispered. Jake turned to face them. "The ship I was on when the accident happened was not a primitive exploration vessel. It was a deep space reconnaissance craft equipped with some of our most advanced military technology. We were part of a mission to explore beyond the edge of known space. Humans were so advanced, where are they now?" Vexter asked. "Why? Have we never encountered them? Because we chose to leave?" Jake replied simply. By the late 21st century, humanity had grown tired of constant warfare with other species. We had the technology to travel to the far edges of the galaxy, so we did. We established colonies in regions so remote that no other civilization would ever find them." Dr. Kalanis was staring at his instruments in disbelief. "I'm getting from his body. His neural activity is unlike anything in our medical databases. And there are artificial components integrated with his biological systems that I cannot identify." Jake nodded. "Enhancement technology. Every human soldier receives upgrades that improve reflexes, strength, intelligence, and sensory perception. What you saw me do against the Korthok was not exceptional by human standards." The implications of his words hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. If Jake was not exceptional, then what were the rest of the humans capable of? "You said your people chose to leave," Vexter said slowly. "Does that mean they are still out there?" "Of course," Jake replied. "Humanity did not become extinct, Captain. We simply decided that the galaxy was too crowded and too violent for our tastes. We found new worlds in the void between galaxies, places where we could develop our civilization without interference." "How many of you are there?" Commander Nexula asked. "I cannot give you exact numbers," Jake said. "But humanity's been expanding into deep space for over 3 centuries. We have established thousands of colonies and developed technology that would seem like magic to most galactic civilizations." Lieutenant Yadin looked at her sensors and made a frightened sound. "Captain, I am detecting something at the edge of our sensor range. Multiple ships approaching at impossible speeds." Jake looked at the readings and nodded. "My pod was equipped with an emergency beacon. When you revived me, it automatically sent a signal to the nearest human monitoring station. My people know where I am." "How many ships?" Vexter demanded. "Probably just one," Jake said. "Human vessels are much larger than what you are used to seeing." On the main screen, a shape began to resolve out of the darkness of space. It was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the Zephyrian warship. Hulls seemed to shimmer and bend light around it, making it difficult to focus on. Energy readings from the approaching vessel were so high that they broke the ship's measuring instruments. "That is not possible," Dr. Kalanis whispered. "No ship can be that large and still move so fast." "Human engineering operates by different principles," Jake explained. "We learn to work with space and time, rather than simply pushing through them." Captain Vexter felt fear growing in his chest. Everything he had believed about his empire's superiority was crumbling. The humans were not extinct primitives. They were something far beyond what he had imagined possible. What do they want? He asked. Jake looked at him with those calm brown eyes. They want to take me home, Captain? First, I think we need to have a serious conversation about the future. The massive human ship moved closer, its hull gleaming with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. Captain Vexler had commanded warships for 30 years, but he had never seen anything like this vessel. It seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, shifting and changing as it approached. Captain, Lieutenant Yaden called out, her voice tight with fear. They are requesting communication. Open the channel, Vexler ordered, though his hands were shaking. The main screen flickered and a human face appeared. It was a woman with short black hair and calm blue eyes. She wore a simple uniform without the elaborate decorations that marked rank in most military organizations. When she spoke, her voice was clear and confident. This is Captain Lisa Park, of the human Deep Space Command vessel, Aurora. I am here to retrieve Sergeant Morrison. Trust he has been treated well during his recovery. Jake stepped forward. Captain Park, I am unharmed. These people rescued me from the wreckage and provided medical care. However, there have been some complications. What kind of complications, Sergeant? They were not aware that humanity still existed. They believed we had gone extinct centuries ago. I felt it was necessary to correct their misunderstanding. Captain Park's expression did not change, but somehow her presence became more intimidating. I see. Captain Vexler, I assume. Vexler stepped forward, trying to maintain his dignity despite the fear growing in his chest. I am Captain Vexler, of the Zephyrian Empire. Your soldier has been our guest for several days. Guest, Captain Park repeated. An interesting choice of words for someone you kept locked in a detention cell. The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances. How did she know about the detention cell? We took reasonable precautions, Vexler replied. We knew nothing about human intentions or capabilities. And now you do, Captain Park said. It was not a question. Dr. Kalanis stepped forward. Captain Park, we mean no harm to your people. We're simply curious about Sergeant Morrison's origins. We had no idea that humanity had achieved such advanced technology. Captain Park studied the alien doctor for a moment. Dr. Kalanis, correct? You performed the revival procedure. You have my thanks for saving his life. How do you know my name? Dr. Kalanis asked. We have been monitoring your ship since you found Jake's pod, Captain Park replied. We know everything that has happened aboard your vessel. Commander Nexula spoke up, anger overcoming her fear. You have been spying on us? We monitor all activity near human assets, Captain Park said calmly. It is standard procedure. We've been watching your empire for quite some time, actually. Watching us? Vexler repeated. The Zephyrian Empire controls several star systems that were once human colonies, Jake explained. We established settlements there over 200 years ago, long before your people arrived. When you expanded into those regions, we decided to observe rather than interfere. Captain Park nodded. Humanity learned long ago that direct confrontation usually leads to unnecessary destruction. We prefer to watch and wait, intervening only when absolutely necessary. What do you mean by intervening? Vexler asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. 3 years ago, the Korthok planned to use biological weapons against civilian populations in the Rigel sector, Captain Park said. Their plague ships mysteriously suffered complete system failures before they could reach their targets. 5 years ago, the hegemony was preparing to enslave the population of New Centauri. Their entire invasion fleet disappeared without a trace. The bridge crew stared at her in growing horror. Events they had attributed to technical failures or natural disasters had been human interventions. You have been manipulating galactic politics for years, Commander Nexola accused. We have been preventing genocide and slavery, Captain Park corrected. Nothing more, nothing less. Humanity has no interest in conquering or ruling other species. We simply will not tolerate certain behaviors. Vexler felt his world shifting beneath his feet. The Zephyrian Empire prided itself on being the dominant power in this region of space. Now he was learning that humans had been watching them like children, capable of destroying them at any time, but choosing not to. What do you want from us? He asked. Captain Park was silent for a moment, as if considering her words carefully. That depends on you, Captain. You have 3 choices. What choices? First, you can pretend this encounter never happened. Return to your patrol routes, file a report about finding empty wreckage, and continue your normal operations. You will erase all evidence of our meeting from your ship's computers. And if we choose that option, nothing changes. Your empire continues, as it always has, and we continue to watch from a distance. You will never see us again unless you threaten innocent populations. Vexter considered this. It would be the safe choice, the one that preserved the status quo. But he was a military officer, and he understood the implications of having a superior force watching his every move. What is the second choice? You can report everything to your government, Captain Park said. Tell them about human technology, about our presence in this region, about what you have learned. They will probably decide that humanity represents a threat that must be eliminated. And then, Captain Park's expression remained calm, but her words sent chills through the bridge crew. Your empire would cease to exist within a matter of days. Not because we want to destroy you, but because we cannot allow threats to our colonies to persist. Dr. Kalanis made a choking sound. You would commit genocide? We would defend ourselves, Captain Park replied. If your empire decided to wage war against humanity, that war would be very brief and very one-sided. We have weapons that can destroy star systems, Captain. We have learned to fight on a scale that most species cannot comprehend. The bridge was completely silent. Everyone could feel the weight of the choice before them. What is the third option? Vexter asked quietly. Captain Park smiled for the first time. Cooperation. Your empire could become humanity's first official contact with galactic civilization. In over 3 centuries, we could share certain technologies, provide protection against threats like the Corach, and work together to create a more stable region of space. What would you want in return? Very little, Captain Park said. We would want assurance that your empire will not threaten civilian populations or engage in slavery or genocide. We would want access to certain strategic locations for monitoring purposes, and we would want your help in maintaining peace in this region. Jake stepped forward. Captain, I recommend the third option. These people are not evil, just uninformed. With proper guidance, the Zephyrian Empire could become a valuable ally. Vexter looked around his bridge at his crew. Dr. Kalanis was staring at his instruments in fascination, clearly eager to learn more about human technology. Lieutenant Yadin looked terrified but curious. Commander Nexula appeared angry but intelligent enough to understand the reality of their situation. If we choose cooperation, Vexter said slowly, how do we know you will keep your promises? Captain Park gestured and something appeared in the air above the bridge. It was a perfect holographic display showing a nearby asteroid field. They watched. One of the asteroids simply vanished, converted to pure energy in an instant. Because we do not need to lie to you, she said simply. We are offering you partnership with the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. The only question is whether you are wise enough to accept it. Vexter realized that his next words would determine the future of his entire empire. He thought about his crew, his people, and the choice between remaining in ignorance or joining. Something greater than anything he had ever imagined. He looked at Jake, who had saved his ship, and opened his eyes to a larger universe. Then he looked at Captain Park, who represented power beyond his comprehension, but was offering friendship. Instead of conquest, Captain Park, he said finally, I believe we have much to discuss.